You better grab an umbrella, because this rain ain't stopping anytime soon. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for joining me today. Today I have a review of Julia Armfield's newest novel, Private Rites, which is published by Flatiron Books. It comes out in July 2024 in the UK, and then in December 2024 in the US. And I received a copy through NetGalley in exchange for a fair and honest review. I started this novel already impressed with Julia Armfield, having read her previous novel, Our Wives Under the Sea, and so I kind of knew a little bit of what to expect. Beautiful language, calm, meditative, unnerving prose and ideas, and that's exactly what she gave us. I don't know how, but somehow she managed to make something that is both ethereal and deeply sunken at the same time. The story feels weighted down, held underwater, and yet if you try to grab it, it'll slip through your hands. There's something foam-like about it. It's an amazing magic trick she's pulled off. This balance of being sunken and held down and yet unable to be grasped onto. There isn't much of a plot. Loosely inspired by King Lear, we follow three estranged sisters who find out their father has died at the very beginning of the novel. First half of the novel is them trying to deal with their own emotional experience and reaction to that and planning his funeral service. And then the second half of the novel takes place roughly 5 months after the first half, where the sisters who have been even more estranged have to come back together to deal with the worsening situation. That's the entire plot. So there isn't a lot of story. However, Armfield makes up for it by having a really intricate world that feels real and terrifying and genuine, complicated characters. This story is bleak, and you're going to read it and feel a whole lot of ways. But that isn't to say it's bad. In fact, it's wonderful, but just be aware that you're not going to feel good at the end of the story. It stays with you and sinks into your body long after you put this book down. The world and the setting of this novel is a near future that has experienced some sort of climate apocalypse where the rains basically never stop, and not only the city is flooded, but the world is flooded. Everything is underwater. It takes place in an unnamed city, which seems like a stand-in for London. Even though the world is ending, that hasn't stopped capitalism from going forward. Everyone tries to pretend things are normal. They create a new normal. They move higher and higher up in the high rises as they seal off the lower levels, and the wealthy find higher and higher ground to build homes on. Or, in the case of our three sisters' deceased father, who was a famous architect, they built houses that are on mechanical stilts that rise the houses above the water level as the water rises. So there is this constant malaise in the city that permeates everything, and the division between the haves and the have-nots is always clear. Even reading the story, you feel like you're not dry, like you're uncomfortably wet. I don't know where you're from, but where I live in India, there's a monsoon season that takes about 3 months of the year. Traditionally, during our monsoon season, we have the middle month of the monsoon. It literally rains almost 24 hours a day for a full month. And then 1 month on either side of that, it's always damp and wet and rainy. Every day it'll rain for a few hours, but not all day. But so for 3 months of the year, nothing ever gets dry. Your clothes are always just a little bit damp when you put them on. If you're not careful and you put them somewhere dark, they're going to get moldy because you think they're dry, but they're not. And this novel embodies that feeling of never being comfortable because the world is underwater and everyone is pervaded by this deep longing and desperation. As I was reading this novel, there are two other novels that jumped to mind right away. The first is Kim Stanley Robbins's New York 2140, which also takes place in a submerged city. What Julia Armfield gives us is what the city might look like 50 years before New York 2140. There's still some sort of functioning infrastructure. They tried to build rail cars above the water. They have ferries that work as taxis, but none of it seems to be working very well. And throughout the course of the novel, everything is breaking down and getting worse. The rain is getting heavier. The other novel I thought quite a lot of was J.G. Ballard's High Rise. Now you might think the first thought would be to Drowned World by J.G. Ballard, but that wasn't where my mind went. I went to High Rise, which is about class disparity and class struggle. And that division is so strongly felt in this story. It isn't one of the most explicit themes, but it is definitely there undergirding everything that happens. And yet, all of our characters live in dry apartments. Now, the water is creeping in, you know. We see floodwaters rising from below. We see strange sea life ending up in people's homes. And yet there's still this big divide, especially because their deceased father is incredibly wealthy And he literally lives in a glass house that raises itself up above the water level, above everyone else. It holds itself up high. And that home and the things that happened in it are part of the conflict between these sisters. We see in this ever-drowning world that human ingenuity can't keep up with the destruction that's brought about by hubris and by human greed and solipsism. So as I mentioned, the story doesn't have a lot of plot, but it does have really intimate explorations of characters. So our three main characters are these estranged sisters. The oldest is Isla. 1 year younger than her is Irene. And then 10 years younger, from a different mother, is Agnes. And these three sisters are incredibly distinct, and they're all ciphers in their own way, because they all desperately want something, but they aren't able to actually explain what it is they want, what it is that's making them feel the way they feel. So as a reader, we're constantly in the dark, even though we follow the three of them constantly, and we know what's in their hearts, what's in their minds. And part of the way this uncertainty is expressed is through them recollecting their childhood, but not being able to recollect it clearly. Everything is fuzzy, everything is hazy. And so everything we know about their father, who is described as monstrous, we only know about through their memories of him, which aren't stable, and they constantly move, and the three sisters' memories combat one another. We have a portrait of these three different sisters as they all navigate inheritance and power and relationship, and they do it in wildly different ways. Not only relationship to each other, but to their partners and to themselves. There is a sense of rot, a sense of despondency that pervades all of their lives. The oldest sister, Isla, always feels like she needs to be in charge of everything. She's a therapist. She tries to fix everything. She tries to organize everything, yet her life is falling apart. She's a therapist who resents her clients and judges them. And meanwhile, her wife has divorced her and left her to go live in some sort of utopian commune that is trying to find dry land in the top of mountains. So even though she has this innate need to create structure and to be in charge of organizing things, everything is crumbling beneath her. The middle daughter, Irene, has a razor-sharp tongue, and that's the only way she knows how to engage the world, is through fighting. She's never satisfied. No matter what she experiences, no matter how anyone approaches her, she responds with violence. Not physical violence, but emotional violence. She can't ever let anything go unsaid. She always has to cut people down. And this kind of emotional warfare is a result of her own uncertainty, her lack of place, her not knowing where she fits in this drowning world, in this submerged family. And then the youngest daughter, Agnes, is incredibly cynical and self-centered. She only cares about herself. She doesn't have any interest in her sisters, but to be fair, they've never had any interest in her. They didn't want her around to begin with. And yet at the same time, she finally meets someone who she might actually want to have a relationship with. She might actually be experiencing something that feels like love, which is something she's never felt before in her life. So we have the therapist who isn't in control of anything. We have the middle sister who is a frayed nerve that lashes out at everyone. And we have the cynic who's falling in love. And yet they don't have any way to speak to one another. The writing and the language in this novel is languid and fraught. It draws the reader in and it pulls you deeper and deeper. But as you submerge into the depths of the ever-rising water, you have nowhere to go. It doesn't bring clarity. It only holds you down. It's incredibly beautiful prose. The structure of the novel is told through the perspectives of these three sisters. Every once in a while, you have the perspective of the city, and there are a few other perspectives that sneak in, but the overwhelming majority of the story rotates through these three sisters, and we'll have a few pages from one, and then another, and then another. And so the structure keeps us seeing the distance from the three sisters. It doesn't ever allow us to experience them together. Now they come together in space. There are scenes where they're all together, many of them, but still the way the novel itself is structured is that we feel the distance. We feel how they're constantly separate from one another. I really think the writing is beautiful. It is very intimate. It draws you in. And for a novel that doesn't really have much of a plot or a story, the writing really holds it up. The writing and the characters work together to create something that's incredibly compelling, even though it's bleak, even though it's going to weigh you down. The prose alone just pulls you in, against your will sometimes. But Armfield isn't just making us depressed for no reason. The story is exploring a lot of really important ideas, and through these characters we have a chance to explore what these ideas mean to us. We have the portrait of the external world constantly invading the internal. So the internal lives of our characters are constantly being acted upon by this suffocating external world. We're shown this portrait of this intimate melodrama of one family, and we have to know, how is this important when the whole world is ending? How does the private and the personal intersect? Is your own private apocalypse more important than the public apocalypse that everyone's experiencing? Through our three sisters' hazy memories, as they try to piece together what they actually remember of their childhood, what happened to them as one mother passed away, another mother left, disappeared, we see how our past trauma conditions us to hide from the very things that can liberate us. Instead of seeking freedom, we often hold on to our trauma tight, and it invades every aspect of our life like a slow leak, filling up one floor at a time. I feel like at the heart of this story is this idea of relationships. What kind of relationships do we have to others and to ourselves? Because relationships can be the life draft that keep us afloat, or they can be the stones that fill our pockets and our shoes and drag us down to the depths. But Armfield doesn't give us any easy answers or easy resolutions. Instead, she forces us to look inside ourselves and ask, what do we hold dear? And will that lift us up, or will it drag us down? This is not a story about action, it is a story about reaction. Armfield manages to create this distinct world that is populated with intimate, relatable characters that crash against one another in the most poetic of ways. This novel is affecting, it is meditative, and it will give you a lot to think about for a long time after you finish reading it. So if you can't tell, I enjoyed it quite a lot. Hope you do too. Have you read it? Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Until then, thank you for joining me today. Be kind to yourself, take care of each other, and go slowly.